Welcome to Board Certified, expert interview episodes about medical licensing exams and healthcare careers. I'm Tyler, founder of Achievable, and we offer affordable adaptive online prep courses for the USMLE Step 1, MCAT, PTCE, NPTE, and others. Each course contains everything you need to succeed, including comprehensive study guides, video lessons, thousands of practice questions powered by our memory enhancing algorithm, and full length practice exams. You can get a free trial of any course by going to achievable.me. And if you like it, be sure to use the code podcast to save 10%. Now, let's get started. Today, we've got Linda Abraham from Accepted joining us. And Linda, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit more about you and your company.
Sure. Well, as you said, my name is Linda Abraham. I'm the founder of Accepted, an admissions consultancy, a premier admissions consultancy that's been in business since 1994. I'm also the co founder of the Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants and served as its first president. Accepted has been advising successful applicants to medical school for a little over 30 years. We also have a lot of resources for medical school applicants, both our podcast, Admission Straight Talk, articles, free guides, free downloads, some webinars and videos, lots of videos. So feel free to visit.
Great. Yeah, so then let's talk today about building a holistic application. And the first question I have is what makes a holistic medical school application holistic? How does that differ from what people normally do?
A holistic application, think of it like a jigsaw puzzle. A jigsaw puzzle has lots of different pieces. They're usually not the same, and they all fit together, and they present a beautiful picture. And that is what a medical school application should do. In terms of what is holistic, a holistic application is going to show that you have the academic horsepower to succeed in medical school. It's going to show that you have the clinical exposure to know what you're getting into and to show commitment to the field, to know that you can handle sick people, their stressed out families, and other healthcare workers who are usually also under pressure. Three, if you're applying to a research oriented program, it'll show that you have research experience. Four, it'll show that you have a commitment to service, specifically service to the underserved. And five, it will show that you have the personal qualities, the compassion, the communication skills, sometimes leadership skills that medical schools value.
Mhm. Yeah, and so how do you build this in an efficient and effective way? At the end of the day, what you're talking about is arguably like you need to do it years in advance, or at least have it planned out years in advance.
I'm so glad you asked that question. As you get to the point where you're ready to apply, you have your great GPA, you should have your MCAT score. Don't wait till the last minute to take it, or put off applying so that you have it under your belt. I'd like to suggest that the applicant should start with making a list. Make a list of everything that you would like the medical schools to know about you. That you overcame a sports injury, that you have been volunteering at a homeless shelter for the last 2 years, that you have shadowed doctors in different specialties, that you've worked as a scribe for a cardiologist for 2 years and perhaps for a pediatrician before that. Maybe that you volunteered in a pediatric oncology playroom, that you worked in a hospice. Whatever it is, make a list of everything you've done. Maybe that you captained the soccer team, the intramural soccer team, or maybe that you were a Division III athlete. Whatever it was, maybe you've worked since graduating college as a business consultant. Whatever it is, make a list. And if you like spreadsheets, some people don't, I think they can be very useful. In the next column, write about some of the attributes that those experiences demonstrated, or the lessons, and a third column would be the lessons you learned from those experiences. How did you change or grow? Or maybe what were the results of the experiences for others? Did you help your business grow? Was there an increase in sales, a reduction in expenses? Did you comfort a sick child who was really, really upset? Did you hold somebody's hand as they were dying? I mean, what was it? What were the results that you achieved? What were the results for you? What were the results for the organization or the other person that you were assisting? Make a list, and it can be as long as you want it to be. And then as you approach first the primary application, think which of those, that long list, is going to go in the different parts of the primary application. the
Mhm.
personal statement, the most meaningful experience essays, the other impactful experience essay if you choose to write it. And that way, again, you think of that jigsaw puzzle. The pieces should fit together. A lot of times I'm asked, should there be an overall arc or narrative to your application? There should be an overall arc or narrative to your personal statement, but not your application because you're a human being. And our lives aren't as neat as a novel.
Mhm.
And they're more interesting when they're not as neat as a novel. So, don't put yourself in a straitjacket thinking that everything has to fit together. It will in that jigsaw puzzle, but
Right.
not in terms of this overarching narrative that I every so often hear about. I don't like that one. So, but then you can pick from that list. And when you get to the secondary applications, where the purpose of the primary is to show you're fit to be a physician, your qualifications to be a physician, the secondary is much more about fit with a given program, the
Mhm.
values of that school, the mission of that school. And you should, again, take from your list things that are not necessarily in the primary. Or if you feel the perfect experience to illustrate a point you're making was in the primary, approach it from a different angle. Talk about a different aspect of the experience. But try very hard not to be a one trick pony.
Interesting. Yeah. So I have a couple of follow-ups to that. The first is a lot of times the advice that I do hear is that you want to build like a cohesive kind of message or story or narrative across your whole application. And it sounds like you disagree with that. So I'm curious
I
if you
do.
could elaborate a little bit more on that.
I do. You have to have a coherent narrative in each essay. I don't think our lives are like that. You're
Mhm.
trying to introduce yourself to the medical school admissions committee. And as we've discussed, there are many different things that your application has to show, right? We've talked about it. Clinical exposure, maybe leadership, maybe compassion, communication skills, sometimes advocacy is also valued by medical schools. So, you're not going to fit that into one coherent narrative. Our lives just are not like that. And the medical school is meeting you, the admissions reader is meeting you as an individual and as a human being through your application. And we're not like that. Peeling an
Mhm.
onion, that has lots of different layers. So don't be afraid to show those different layers. And that will help make you, by the way, a more distinctive applicant if you're not trying to fit yourself and shoehorn yourself into a certain box.
Yeah.
As long as you show your qualifications and you're fit with a given school.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm curious when you were talking about building a big list and then what are all the things you want to make sure the school knows about you,
Yeah.
is
Mm-hmm.
I found it interesting that in that list, it didn't sound like you were particularly concerned about GPA or test scores, right? Obviously, you're not going to say in your personal statement, I got a great MCAT score. That's probably not a good idea. But is it because you separate those two things? Like you consider that to be like pre-application work, and then this is
No,
the application part?
not why.
Yeah. Okay.
Why repeat what's in other parts of the application? You're trying to provide as many reasons to admit you as you possibly can. Your GPA and your MCAT and your transcript are already there. They have that. Why put it in the written portions?
Mhm.
That's duplication. That's not that jigsaw puzzle fitting together. That's overlap.
Yeah,
They're not going to learn anything from you if you repeat it. They're
for
that.
sure. I meant it more not from like a what should you include in the essays part, but more of a process part. So I think it's maybe it's just like a separate process, like prep for that MCAT like earlier on, and then you're doing these apps like 6 months
Oh,
later kind of
absolutely.
thing.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
One of the most common mistakes I talk about in that video series I mentioned choosing the wrong schools. Well, if you
Mhm.
don't have your MCAT score, it's very hard to know where you're going to be competitive. You could get a much
Right.
better score than you anticipated. You could get a worse score than you anticipated. Both can happen. So, where to apply? To the fact that if you don't have the MCAT when you apply, your application won't be verified. So, you're kind of up the creek without a paddle. I mean, there are some paddles, but that's a different topic.
Yeah. Great. And I mean, with this, you basically put together, it sounds like there's like a constellation of primary school or primary application essays that you do. How do you handle the deluge of secondary applications that comes next? And also, how do you make sure that you're telling different stories in those secondary applications? Because, like you said, you don't just want to repeat like your same points from your primary one over again.
Right. So again, if you have that list that you started with before you even started working on your primary, presumably some of the things you've already checked off. So you will turn to those things that you haven't discussed that you're still proud of, the achievements that somehow didn't make it into the primary, and that will answer the questions posed by the secondary. Now, sometimes you might have an experience like somebody wrote me recently, I've done hospital volunteering and I want to write about it here and I want to write about it there. And I'm like, well, hospital volunteering is a really broad label. Maybe at one point you volunteered in the ER, and another point you were volunteering in the playroom that I just mentioned, right? Those are very different kinds of volunteering. Or maybe even if you were volunteering in the ER, you've had many different experiences that you can draw on. So, when you're making that list, don't just use these big umbrella kinds of terms. Be a little bit more specific about what you are most proud of, the achievements again. That's what you're going to want to focus on, the accomplishments. That's one advantage of sitting down with that list before you even start writing your primary application. Then you can take the things that haven't been used on the primary and use them on the secondary. And sometimes diving deeper into an experience and being more specific will allow you to use a broader experience more than once. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to mention in terms of the secondaries and preparing for the deluge. There's going to be a gap between when you submit your primary and when you submit your secondary. And what I would encourage you to do is for those programs that you're most interested in, which are probably going to be your in-state schools, because that's where you're going to get tuition break, or you're likely to get one, and then those out-of-state schools that really, really you would like to attend. Pre-write the secondaries. You can draft secondaries. Some secondary application essay questions are already posted online. Most of them have not been posted online, but you can use the last year's to pre-write. And that will give you the ability to have drafts already when the secondaries come in. In most cases, the essay questions don't change. In those cases where they do change, okay, you're going to have to rewrite it. What I would discourage you from doing in terms of your pre-writing is writing a diversity essay and a leadership essay and a clinical experience essay, because that is a way to ensure that your secondaries are more generic, which you don't want to be. And also, it will probably result in you're not taking maximum advantage of the secondary application real estate. So go application by application as you pre-write these essays. You'll be able to adapt some essays, that's fine. But when you adapt them, the first thing you should do is change the name of the school on the essay. Put the new prompt at the top of the page and first change the name of the school. Don't wait, because one of the more common mistakes that people make is leaving in the wrong school name.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably pretty bad. Yeah,
You
I'm
really want to
curious
go to
though.
school A when applying to school B, yeah?
And I'm curious too. You mentioned that these need to be responded to quickly. How quickly is quickly, and how much does it matter that you did it in 2 weeks versus four, for instance?
Well, I think the rule of thumb is you need to respond within 2 weeks, okay? I think the problem with waiting is that interview spots are being given out. And the fewer interview spots there are, it's a little bit of musical chairs going on. Are you going to get that interview spot? So that's why you want to respond to them quickly. In terms of is 2 or 4 weeks going to make a difference? Well, I gave you one reason it makes a difference. The other thing is, and I think this is less important if you're talking about 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, is time management. You're demonstrating time management by being able to turn that thing around with quality, not with sloppy drivel. If you're talking about 2 months, then you're either showing a lack of interest or poor time management, and you don't really want to show either one of those.
Yeah. Yeah, so then when you're doing the secondary essays and even the primary ones, what are the parts of your non-academic side that you should be emphasizing? What are the pieces of you that obviously everybody's different, so like this is going to vary depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what are some of the things you encourage people when they're making their list? What should they be putting on this list?
Well, experiences where they had an impact, where they made a difference, where they can talk about results that they achieved. That would certainly be stuff that should be on that list. In addition, we talked about some of the personal qualities that medical schools are going to be looking for. I mentioned compassion, commitment to both clinical medicine and to service, communication skills, leadership, right? Advocacy, if relevant. So there are lots of things. And again, look, you can also look at the school mission statements. And MCAS has, I think, 15 things that medical schools look for, and I'm blanking on the word right now. But those qualities are things that you want to be revealing in your medical school applications.
Yeah, and then how much should you be referencing things that you talked about in your applications in the interview process? Should you be trying to bring up your leadership experience again, even if it's a little bit not forced, or should you really just try to even not touch those things and talk about new things for a third time?
I think some of that depends on the questions that are being asked. You want to answer the question. You don't want to be like a politician who just says what they want to say when asked a question in an interview. It doesn't work
Right.
very well. So it depends on the question that's asked. It also depends on whether the interviewer has access to your whole application or not. And you can usually find that out. If the interview is blind, in other words, the interviewer has not seen your application, then you can go back to your best stories. If your interview is not blind, in other words, the interviewer has reviewed your application, then you can maybe reference some of the stories in your application, but you also want to come with new ones. And the third thing I would like to say is that, let's say, even if it is blind, in other words, the interviewer has not seen your application at all, and you had some fantastic achievement that occurred since you sent in your secondary, something got published, for example, then you want to bring that up for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it gives you one extra thing that you can plug in something.
Sure.
Then I wanted to ask about the flip side. So let's say your GPA wasn't that great, or you had a bad GPA in undergrad proper, but then you went to some post-bac programs and mastered those topics after the fact, or things like that, just like bad news in general. And I don't mean bad news like you had a personal tragedy, bad news like something related to your application itself. How do you account for that in your essays, and where should you account for it? Should it be in the primaries? Should it be in the secondaries? Or should it even be something that you're prepared to talk through in the interview?
You should definitely be prepared to talk about it in the interview. That's for sure. Um, it a little bit depends on the context of what caused, let's say, the dip in grades or a period of unemployment or whatever. Sometimes it can be discussed in the other impactful experience essay or maybe even most meaningful experience essay. Depends what caused the problem, what was going on. Usually it can be addressed in a secondary if it wasn't addressed in the primary. And I think that if there was a serious dip in grades, or sometimes it could be an infraction, cheating incident or DUI or something like that, it has to be addressed. Exactly where you address it, well, that depends, again, on the circumstances. And the key thing in addressing it is showing that it's no longer affecting your life. So let's say, there's family illness. You're healthy, but there was a family member who was ill, and seriously ill. And maybe the illness is ongoing. Is somebody else taking care of that family member, or are you going to be pulled away constantly from medical school because of this family situation? You have to show this, and you have to show it both in terms of describing what happened, describing what you've done to handle it, and then showing that if in the case of poor grades, that your grades have improved or were good when you weren't dealing with that particular situation. If you're talking about a DUI or an academic infraction, then you have to take responsibility for mistakes, and you might have to put some time in between the incident, whatever it was, and your application to show that this is not representative of you. It might have been a youthful indiscretion, a mistake. Everybody reading the application is a human being. I guarantee you everybody has made a mistake along the way. But they want to know that this isn't indicative of you as a human being.
And I think also like what you did next, right?
Yeah,
And like how
yeah.
you handled
And
it.
right. And sometimes I know Dr. Herman Gordon, who's an accepted.com accepted consultant and former admissions director at the University of Arizona Medical School. He says, if you then got really active in some kind of redemptive activity. So, for example, if you were caught cheating and then you took your F or took whatever punishment was meted out to you, and then you got involved in talking about the experience to other students. Obviously, there was no more cheating on your part, and you were talking to students to help them stay away from the mistake that you had made. Then that, again, it's more of a redemptive kind of activity. If you had an alcohol problem or a DUI and you started talking to high school kids about the evils of drunk driving, it's a redemptive kind of activity. So there's things that you can do in that way also that shows I've really changed. And again, your grades would then have to be competitive and MCAT.
Yeah, that's all great advice. Anything else that we didn't cover on building a holistic medical school application?
I don't think so. I think, I just want to emphasize again that there's a lot of talk about personal brand. A personal brand is reflected in our behavior, in our activities, in our history. A cowhide stamp, it's not a jingle on the radio, and individuality, it kind of goes with that holistic application. Doesn't mean that you have to do something weird or fantastic or really truly unusual, but try and reflect the many dimensions, the multidimensionality that is a unique human being, and that's what every applicant is.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. This has been Board
Thank you.
Certified, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Linda Abraham from Accepted. And Achievable has a great online course for the USMLE Step 1, the MCAT, PTCE, and PTE, and more. You can try any of them out for free by visiting achievable.me.